WNST Radio here, as many of you know or maybe have read, we're going to be expanding our conversation here in the coming days and weeks and months. The minute I get through my chest cold, that is. All of our programming brought to you by our friends at Howard Bank. I now have a delicious Howard Bank coffee mug to move along my morning coffee, along with some Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast, and the Rofo coffee inside the Howard Bank mug. And inside the little headset here, Luke Jones joins us after a respite for both of us. I came back from Minnesota and got sick as a dog on a vacation and came home. And here we are talking about the Ravens on the front end of an NFL draft we're going to 2 weeks from now, and free agency that begins in about 3.5 weeks. It is a busy, busy time for the Ravens right now, Luke.
Well, internally it is. It's not so busy for those of us waiting for morsels of news, whether you're really excited about them signing DeVere Posey, a former Ohio State receiver, was in the CFL, actually Grey Cup MVP. But it's really a slow time for outsiders, but it's very much a time where they're getting their house in order as far as what they want to do with the offseason. The Combine's about 2 weeks away, so certainly Indianapolis, that'll be buzzing as far as meeting with different prospects and seeing what happens. And NFL free agency is about a month away now, so it's really that hurry up and wait time for everyone else, but the Ravens, it's a matter of what they're going to do in terms of getting their cap in order, clearing some cap space, what cuts they're going to make. Unlike past years, I'm not sure there are too many clear-cut decisions there, and that's one thing that's a little unsettling if you're a fan looking at some of the projections, some of the reports out there as far as where their cap is. There aren't necessarily a lot of slam-dunk candidates there, so we know what Steve Bisciotti had to say a couple weeks ago. They certainly are talking the right game in terms of what they're going to do, trying to improve this offense, but we need to see it. It's one thing to just talk about wide receiver. We've heard them talk about wide receiver in the past, and we know how that's worked. So I'm very skeptical about that part of the equation, but this is certainly a big time for the Ravens on a lot of different levels, even if we're not hearing a lot of news coming out of one winning drive.
Well, and I guess in the case of where the big needs are for them, and I mean, I don't even know what that represents at this point because there's so much thought about the running back position and the guys they have and where they are that maybe that's more filled, but I don't know that I trust the 16th pick with a wide receiver. Do you?
Well, I think you have to look at wide receiver. I think you look at tight end. Those are the two that are obvious. I'm not sure there's a clear-cut option at tight end. That's there at 16. Certainly everyone's talked about Calvin Ridley from Alabama. I mean, that's kind of a logical choice if he's there at 16, but that's the big question. I mean, you go back to last year and you look at those three wide receivers that there was so much dialogue about, so much talk about the Ravens potentially being after a Corey Davis, and all three were gone in the first 10 picks. So it's very much a moving target when you're talking about wide receiver, when you're talking about tight end. There are other directions the Ravens can go in the first round. I don't think it's necessarily defense. I don't think it necessarily should be defense, but you just have to see who's there, and there's a long way to go until the draft. But I think it's very clear what this team needs to do in terms of its biggest needs. How they go about doing that still remains to be seen, whether it is the draft. I think even if you draft a wide receiver, you can't just say, okay, well, that's done. They need to go sign at least one other wide receiver, unless you're bringing back Mike Wallace. And even then, I'd say you probably need another receiver to throw into the mix there. So this needs to be a multi-layered plan here. This can't just be drafting a wide receiver. It can't just be signing a veteran wide receiver. I think you have to have a mix of both. And how that's going to look eventually, that's hard to say at this point. I mean, everyone's going to talk about guys on the free agent market like Jarvis Landry, like an Allen Robinson if he gets to the market, which I think is a big if at this point. And certainly you can make compelling arguments for guys like that being compelling. You can make a compelling argument for Calvin Ridley, but you don't know who among them is going to be available to you. You might not even get a chance to sign some of those receivers that have been bantered about. You might not get a chance to sign or to draft a Ridley. So it really is a position for the Ravens that, okay, I mean, their defense for the most part looks pretty set. I could see them bringing in a piece or two at some point, a day 2 or early day 3 draft pick to throw into the mix. I don't think the defense is going to be completely ignored, but certainly that side of the ball is much more settled than the offense. But let's keep in mind, we're talking a lot about wide receiver and tight end, and rightfully so. This team's center, Ryan Jensen, who was really the anchor of that offensive line when you look at what they were dealing with at both guard positions over the course of the year, he's going to be a free agent. Do you really want to be in a position where it seems like you finally found a center that can anchor, that can really be the leader of the middle of that offensive line, has that chip on his shoulder, played at a really high level this past year, and then you're going to let him walk? Now, that said, you can't pay him whatever he wants, I suppose, but at the same time, I'm guessing there's going to be a market for him. So this team very well could have at least one need on its offensive line as well. So there's a lot of work to do on the offensive side of the ball, and as great as it is to have a middle of the first-round pick from that standpoint, it's still not a top 5 pick or 6th overall like they were a couple years ago. So the needs are plentiful on the offensive side of the ball, but the resources, those are more limited. So it's going to be really interested to see how the Ravens ultimately go about doing this.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, and we'll be monitoring all Ravens stuff. It really is quiet, right? I mean, I don't know what the next the worst thing you have in the offseason are arrests, right? I mean, that's the only way there would be sort of kind of news at this point that would be useful at any point. There are no visits. There's none of that. But everything's really about the draft right now and getting out to Indianapolis. You and I will be out there 2 weeks from now doing the Underwear Olympics and all of that. I don't even know where to begin to put this thing together, but I know the quarterback thing is something for the first time in a long time. We're going to be looking at who they're going to select and where that's going to come from in the 2nd round, 3rd round, 5th round, whatever it's going to be. But they're going to burn a pick on a quarterback.
You would think so. I mean, if anything, and I said this to you when we were talking about it in Minneapolis on Radio Row, I think at the very least you need to be looking to upgrade Ryan Mallett. I think Steve Bisciotti made it clear that, at least publicly, they're not in a position where they're seriously pursuing Joe Flacco's heir apparent, and I think that makes sense. From a cap standpoint, really even next year, it's not all that feasible to be parting ways with Joe Flacco. I mean, even next year, the most viable way to do it would be a post-June 1st cut, and then you don't really get any benefit of that cap space. So you're looking at this year and really next year from a financial standpoint that you're committed to him. So instead of worrying about seeing if, Mason Rudolph or Josh Rosen or Sam Darnold, whoever ends up potentially being there at 16, and I'm guessing at least a couple of those guys are going to be long gone. I think you look much more to day 2, late day 2, if even day 2, and early day 3. I think for me personally, the earliest I'd be looking for a quarterback is probably the end of the 3rd round, more likely the 4th round. And in that territory. You go much later than that, you're really pushing it to see if you're even going to get someone that's going to be an upgrade over Ryan Mallett. But the reality is, Joe Flacco's had issues staying healthy. I mean, 2015, he tears his ACL. He misses all of training camp last year. He's 33 years old. He's 6'6". I'm not sure, given what's happened over the last few years, that you can just pencil in Joe Flacco for not just 16 games. He played 16 games this year, but more importantly, 16 healthy games, and that's a little more of a question mark at this point. And even with that, what's his performance level going to be? It's clear that he needs to play at a higher level. He did play at a higher level late in the season, but you want to see that continue. So it really much is a case of, with Flacco, that they have to be looking to get someone in there that can be a little more viable, a little more potent than what Ryan Mallett was in the preseason last year, and someone that maybe has some upside that in a couple years, if at that point you're looking to move on from Joe Flacco, that maybe they can be the guy. If you end up finding the next Dak Prescott, great.
Nick Foles.
Right. I mean, if you find someone like that, beautiful. But if you can even just find another Tyrod Taylor type, and I guess even saying that, we don't know how Tyrod Taylor would have played in Baltimore. We never really got to see it, but we know what he went on to do in Buffalo. Even if you can find someone like that, it's a cheaper option, it's a younger option, and you know what? Maybe in the back of Joe Flacco's mind even, maybe it would be him being pushed just a little bit more than he has been here in recent years, where, you'd have to go back to what? Mark Bulger in 2010 for you to really look at any kind of a backup quarterback that could be viewed as even a semblance of a threat to him. So, I think the quarterback position is going to be really interesting to follow, but I would be very surprised if we're seeing a quarterback picked in the first couple rounds. I'd even be pretty surprised even in the third round, considering what the many needs that the Ravens have that we just discussed and will continue to discuss. So I'm looking much more in that early day 3 territory as far as finding a quarterback. And the long story short, the Ravens are definitely or should definitely be doing much more homework on the quarterbacks than they've had to do in a long time.
Well, the Foles thing kind of screws things up for everybody, right, Luke? I mean, just in general, the thought is a backup quarterback could never do what he did, right? So your thought of, well, put Tyrod in or put Ryan Mallett in or, hey, your season's over whenever you're starting quarterback. Hey, there aren't 32 starting quarterbacks in the league, right? That is the popular opinion. And I'm not saying that'll ever happen again. It's been, a lifetime since Jeff Hostetler did it a million years ago. And, for every Darryl LaMonica out there or whoever your backup quarterback would happen to be, that sort of rings it in a different tone to say, well, to have a backup quarterback that we could get by with, and that's what Mark Bulger was thought to be, or any of those other number of guys that they brought in that were veteran guys back in the day. But there is a notion that you bring in a veteran quarterback because Case Keenum could win you a Super Bowl, theoretically.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, I'm not convinced that we're going to see, or that actually is any kind of a breakthrough, but certainly some teams could interpret it that way. I mean, the reality is, what Nick Foles, keep in mind, this is a guy who had a tremendous statistical season a few years back in Chip Kelly's offense. I mean, as much as Chip Kelly's become a punchline in terms of what his NFL run was like, Nick Foles had a lot of success. What was that, 2013? So I don't know how much that dramatically changes things, because I think the thing we have to remember with teams like Philadelphia, like Minnesota, I guess to a lesser degree with them, because Sam Bradford was making some decent coin, certainly, but these are rosters that were built around quarterbacks on rookie contracts. Carson Wentz, you're paying him substantially less than a Joe Flacco or any other veteran quarterback you want to talk about that's in the top 12, let's say, in contracts, that you have a chance to build a much better roster. So then when that quarterback goes down, they were in a unique position that they knew they had a good backup quarterback. I mean, Nick Foles had success in this league. Now, winning a Super Bowl, that's a little bit different. I don't think anyone expected that, really, but it will be interesting to see how teams try to view the backup position. I mean, my goodness, not even trying to get into the non-football part of the discussion. I mean, look how many teams could have used Colin Kaepernick from a football standpoint this past year. There isn't enough quality there. As you mentioned, there aren't 32 quality starters. So, yeah, in a perfect world, you'd like to have a pretty good backup. But
you think Kaepernick's going to get a job, by the way, while we're 8 months out on this?
At this point, I'd have to say no at this point. I mean, if he hasn't to this degree, and certainly, with the grievance and different things like that, I mean, I'll never say never, but I would have thought it would have happened by now. And it didn't happen this past year, and, at some point then you throw another excuse into it. Well, he hasn't played in over a year. He didn't play last year. It's been a 2-year absence for him, so you just kind of pile up the
Well, that's what happened to Ray Rice. Once he was out a year, it was like, well, he's old now, right?
Right. I mean, it's just another excuse that you add to the list of teams not signing him. But, to bring it back to the quarterback discussion, I mean, there's absolutely a shortage of quality quarterbacks, so I'm not sure the Nick Foles thing changes anything. It might change teams' perspectives of wanting to try to have a better backup quarterback, but you can want a better backup all you want. Doesn't mean you're going to find it. I mean, even as I just spent a few minutes talking about the Ravens and how I would approach the draft for them at the quarterback position, it's great to say that you should draft a quarterback with your fourth-round pick. There might not be one there that's worthy of a fourth-round pick. I mean, it might be that guys that you had a fourth-round grade went off the board late in the second round. So it really is a case of there isn't near the supply to satisfy the demand as starters and certainly as backups in this league, regardless of what happened with Nick Foles, and what a great story that was.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. I'd like to say he's in Owings Mills covering everything, but he won't be. He'll be in Indianapolis with me 2 weeks from now, running around for the underwear Olympics and getting this ready. And, you know, based on the Bisciotti press conference and all of this, it can be very interesting to see who takes credit, blame, responsibility in all of this as this transitional phase. And we've never really talked much about the transitional phase. I remember when Maryland tried the transitional phase from Friedgen, right? That didn't work out so well. I think this is going to work out differently because I know Eric, I know Steve, I know this has been the plan for a long, long time. But how does this work over the next 8 months, 9 months, 10 months? Who makes the final call? And who's really kind of running the show? And I think that that's a fair question to ask in this transitional phase where, let's be honest, there can only be one decision maker, right? Yeah,
and that's something that I pondered aloud at WNST.net, my most recent 12 Ravens thoughts on just a variety of off-season topics. It's not just the next 8-9 months and the 2018 season, but Ozzie Newsome, if you recall, released a statement that Saturday morning after Steve Bisciotti had revealed the Ravens' plans that DeCosta would be taken over in 2019, and he, in his statement, flat out said that he will remain with the Ravens in a significant position at that point. Well, what does significant mean? Because to the point that you just made, if it's a significant position, meaning he still has a lot of influence, is Eric DeCosta truly in charge then, or is this just a shuffling of titles? Now, from everything we understand, and I know you've talked about it, I've talked about it, we've talked about it privately quite a bit at various points over the last year or two, it seems like Eric DeCosta is going to be running the show, but if Ozzie Newsome's still in a significant, and that's the quote, that's the word that he used, if he's in that kind of a position, it's not hard anticipating some potential problems there, especially when you look in the scope of where this organization is right now, with the head coach who very well could be in his last year if the Ravens miss the playoffs again, with a quarterback who's dealt with injury and consistency issues and isn't getting any younger. I mean, you just look at all the different issues. There are going to be some really tough decisions to make here at some point over the next couple years. And if Ozzie Newsome's still in a, quote, significant position, is there some potential for some disagreement? I mean, we all know Eric and Ozzie have a great relationship. That's not part of the issue here. But somewhere in there, there's a player Ozzie drafted that Eric wouldn't have drafted. Of course. I mean, you're going to have disagreements. I mean, any successful company, anyone that has successful people that care about their business, you're going to have disagreements. I don't care how similar you might be. You're going to disagree on issues, and that's where I do have not necessarily concern, but I'm intrigued. I'm very interested to see what. Remember when the Orioles had two general managers? Remember that? Yeah. I mean, and to the point that you just made, and you brought up Maryland, James Franklin with Ralph Friedgen. I mean, you can go down the list. You can find coach in waiting, GM in waiting, executive in waiting, tons of those scenarios across sports. And you know what? A lot of them do not work out. I don't know. I haven't done the math. I'd say most of them probably haven't worked out over the years. The doubt, though. I mean, I would say they fine. I mean, for now, because of it's been 15 years. I mean, they've been together, and it is what it is. But that being said, when does
Eric really make the call. And I'm assuming it's not April 20 whatever. I gotta learn that date, this year for the draft so I can refer to it. I guess let me get that date right so everybody can, because it is a long way off, but it's not a long way off. April 26th is the date this year.
It's still a long way off. We're going to be talking about the draft plenty. But yeah, no, to your point, I mean, the way that Bisciotti made it clear that Ozzie Newsome's still running the show this year. Now, we've talked about this, and I don't think it's been any secret that Eric's had more influence, not more than Ozzie, but more influence in recent years than he did prior to that. And I think that's logical, especially when he was named assistant general manager officially in, 2012, I think that was. But it is going to be fascinating, not just the decisions this year, but then the transition next offseason, especially if the Ravens miss the playoffs again, or if they make the playoffs and have some success. Is that going to be something that gets the juices flowing for Ozzie Newsome a little bit more? So, again, I'm not saying that it won't work. I'm not even saying that I have major doubts about it per se, but I am interested to see how that hierarchy is going to work. I mean, to me, I don't care how qualified you are for your position. I don't care how much you like your boss. But keep in mind, Ozzie has been Eric's boss for all these years. When you have a chance to take over and start running the show, I'm not sure how well that works out if your boss continues to be looking over your shoulder and is still in a very significant position and still has a lot of influence. So who knows? For all we know, that's what the Ravens are saying. And come next January, maybe it is a case where Ozzie moves into much more of an emeritus kind of a position where, okay, he still sits in some meetings and is still around the building and still comes and watches practice, but isn't really highly involved in the decision-making process. If that's the case, then fine. I'd sign off on this much more, but if it is a case where he's still there every single day and he's still sitting in on every single meeting, you do really wonder, even if it's subconscious, for that DaCosta is truly running the show, or if it's more a case of, okay, they've made him GM, but Ozzie is still kind of sort of calling the shots, even if it's in some different football title that they give him.
He is Luke Jones. He is Luke at WNST.net and Baltimore Luke, and plenty to discuss now that we know the date is April 26th. And it feels like a long way off, but I have a feeling it's going to sneak up on us, Luke.
I don't. The draft process, it drags. It really does.
Well, especially those 3 days in Indianapolis.
Well, I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about from the point that really free agency calms down, which free agency begins in March. March 14th or March 12th is when teams can start contacting. March 14th is when teams can start signing other teams' free agents. But from that point, right around March 20th, March 21st, that first week of free agency is over. You still have a long way to go until the draft, and that's when you start hearing the silly rumors and lies and damn lies and all that. So it's a long ways away. I'm fine with draft coverage. I enjoy a good portion of it, but there's overkill, let's be honest. And what was interesting is that Steve Bisciotti even kind of acknowledged that, talked about some of their over-analysis on their top 60, their top 90 draft prospects internally with the Ravens, with the scouts, the coaches, etc. So maybe that was a little signal to the outside world that maybe we not overhype, because it's certainly very important, but maybe there is some paralysis by analysis that goes on with having so much time until draft day.
All right, well, we're going to be there in Indianapolis, and between now and then, I will be mixing in a little bit of other stuff with our sports conversations around here, including wearing my Free the Birds hat once in a while as spring training begins, and I think Luke is penciled in as the number 4 starter. I would be the 5th starter, but I'm banned, so I'm unavailable, but we'll see how Sarasota goes as well as we inch up on Indianapolis 2 weeks from now. My Rob Halford interview from Judas Priest next week, all coming at you. All of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at Howard Bank as well as Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Want to give a shout out to Pizza John's where Luke dined over the weekend and looked like Luke, dude, what's the deal with the pepperoni and the meat sauce? You don't do any veggies on your pizza, huh?
No. Pepperoni and meat sauce, or I get the pepperoni and meat sauce all together, which I took a pie home and was finishing that.
Dude, you're missing out if you're not getting the sausage and the green pepper and the mushroom on that pie down at Pizza John's.
I'm not missing out at all. I love the way that's the beauty of Pizza John's. We all have our different combinations.
There's 4 toppings on a Pizza John's pizza. There's pepperoni, there's sausage, there's green pepper, and there's mushroom, and that's the way it should be done.
You are totally missing out on the meat sauce there, though. I mean, you totally are. I'm not much. Most places you go to, you get meat sauce. They sprinkle a little bit hamburger on it, and it's fine. It's
not that Chef Boyardee nonsense. It's Pizza John's here, right?
Pizza John's, you get meat sauce there. It is coated and it is delicious. So that's where you can have your toppings the way you like it. I'll have my meat sauce, and there's delicious little grease cups with the pepperoni.
Hey, some people get the meatball subs or the cheesesteaks or whatever, but
very good as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, you got that meat sauce sticking to your ribs there. That's gonna keep you warm here the rest of February. All of our WNST sponsors, big thanks to them sending us off to Super Bowl 52 out in Minnesota. Of course, our Ray Lewis bus trip on sale, selling quite briskly. I think we're on to our 3rd bus now, so you want to check that out under the road trips tab at WNST.net. You can always email me, nasty@WNST.net. Anything you miss, you can find out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. We're very, very easy to reach from anywhere as well. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel as soon as I can get it unlocked. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 at WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports